Right.
Okay, and then you go ahead and put this on, save. Okay, cool. All right. Good morning, Jim.
How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. We could complain, but there's no use doing that, so we're not going to do
Right,
it.
right.
Everyone, this is Jim Quigg. Jim Quigg has taught here at the college, so if he looks vaguely familiar, it's because he's taught here, and I'm trying so hard to get him to come back and teach here. I'm working on maybe having a photojournalism class in the fall. Hopefully, fingers crossed, we will get him back. Please take the class. Please take the class. Then he comes back more. He was the chief photographer at the Daily Press, still works for the Daily Press freelance. He will also explain all the other things he does. He has worked at Encore. He's worked at different places around the high desert. So you may have seen him in one of his different versions of him.
Right. Yeah.
All right.
I get to know a lot of people. One of my favorite photojournalism is especially when you're like a community photojournalist, you get to meet a lot of people a little bit. So yeah, I've probably crossed paths, probably seen some of the faces out there. So
take it away. I'm going to walk away real quick. They are listening to you and watching you.
Okay.
Shut my doors in case there's noise. Okay.
You know what I forgot to check on is, can I take over the screen?
Yes, you can.
And now I got to remember, you're right. It's been a while since I've done.
You're looking for a green box with a black arrow that says share.
Yeah, there it is. Yeah.
Screen. Well, I'll be right back. I'm
okay.
Listening. I'm just shutting my doors.
Give me a minute while I let me introduce while I'm
You want me to stall
in here? Yes, if you could stall just for a second.
Vamping.
We're looking at your wall behind you. We're looking at are those your prints?
Yes. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about that today, but analog and alternative and historic processes is one of my favorite things to do. Why is this thing making me do a whole bunch of password stuff? Yes. I don't want to quit and reopen.
If you haven't used it in a while, I'll probably make you update it too. Just warning.
Yeah. Can you guys see my screen yet?
No, we cannot.
All right.
Do I need to go to a website?
Nope.
Oh, you got it. You got it. It's
got
working.
It? Okay.
Yeah, we're seeing all your allow system stuff.
And now you're going to see all of my okay, what I just don't want to do it right now.
Yeah.
Right. Can you guys see my
yes.
Yes.
There we go. All right. So Miss Shelby told me you guys are working. She's getting you ready to start kind of like looking at and preparing and setting up to build your portfolios. So everything I'm going to talk about as far as my career and my world of photojournalism, which is a little different than being a photographer, I'm going to do it through the concept and the mindset of selecting your best photos and how to arrange and how to present your best photos. So I'm going to give you my general career day discussion, but also presenting it through the idea of collecting your work. The other interesting thing, the other reason this coincides really nicely is that I'm also just beginning the process of kind of like compiling all of my work. If you notice I've got what little hair I do have left is of a very certain color. And I've been around a while. I've been doing this. I literally started photography. I literally started learning about the art and the craft of photography when I was in second grade. I knew that I wanted photography to be some part of my career by the time I was in seventh grade. And I'm going to try to combine all of that stuff into one portfolio, one collection of work through pretty much that talks about my whole life as a photographer. So I didn't, of course, I'm not ready to share my whole life as a photographer, but I'm pretty much got through and sorted out 2006, 2016, which was a lot of my work for the Daily Press. So you'll see a lot of stuff. Everything here, almost everything here was shot in Victorville, Hesperia, Apple Valley, Adelanto, and that whole area. Again, okay, as far as what I'm doing now, I still freelance for the Daily Press. I freelance for the San Bernardino Sun. I teach classes whenever I can get hooked up and lined up into a semester of teaching classes. I do a lot of freelancing for public relations kind of freelancing. I don't do your general, well, I won't not do it. The weddings, the senior portraits, engagements, and that kind of thing. But I mostly do freelance work for public relations type situations. I photograph for a couple of the hospital and healthcare networks. I photograph for several charities around the area, and it's basically a lot of testimonial. You know, my life was in misery. My life was in despair. I found this charity. I found this doctor, turned my life around. And so I'll photograph and do video clips of those sorts of things. It's a little similar to photojournalism, but it's not exactly photojournalism. You can find my work on my website and at Instagram. Be careful, there's 2 James Quiggs in the world. My son floats around. We have the same thing. So yeah, just look for the more photography oriented one. I don't know if Miss Shelby has gone over this particular quote. Henry Cartier-Bresson is one of the best known. He's kind of like laid the foundation for modern photojournalism, anything from the 1930s on. And he also, later in his career, became quite the spokesman, quite the teacher of photojournalism, or some of the concepts behind photojournalism. And he coined this phrase, the decisive moment, that all of us photographers are chasing this decisive moment. And if you looked on Google and if you searched Henri Cartier-Bresson decisive moment, you will find about 16, 17 different ways that Bresson phrased this. Whenever he talked, whenever he wrote, whenever he discussed, he would phrase things a little bit differently in his description of the decisive moment. So you'll find, yeah, like I said, 16, 17 different versions of him talking and explaining this decisive moment. But this is the one that I appreciate most for students, for you guys to learn, to be able to understand and to grasp that it's a little bit more than just snapping the photo at the right time. Okay. First of all, you've got to decide when you're out there photographing, when you're choosing what to photograph or how you're going to photograph, you have to find out, or you have to take a look at what it is, what your subject is, what your topic is, what your issue is, and what's its significance, what's most important about it, what makes people care about it. Why do you care about it? What do you want your viewers to care about it? Okay. And then in that, you want to figure out, what is that proper expression? How do I get that across to my viewers, to the people who are going to be looking at my photographs? Will they understand this? Okay. And how can I give it a way that's going to give that feeling and mood the way that I want them to have it? All right. And then finally, this is where I really want to concentrate and help you guys understand, is finding out that precise organization. Everything in your frame, everything in your collection, of your overall collection of your work in a portfolio, has to be, you have to consider everything. You are in charge. You are the photographers. You are the masters. You are the bosses of everything you see in that viewfinder, everything you print out, and everything you display to your readers. Does that make sense? Take control. Be the boss. Don't, make sure that that everything is going to be precisely organized and hit. And then this is another quote that I found just recently in a book that I'm reading that really talks about what's going to separate out those images that belong in your portfolio, what images don't belong in your portfolio. And it's going to really, and I hope that you guys can read this and this will help you make sense of what you really want to put into your viewfinder and what you don't want to have in your viewfinder. Okay. Years ago, another state, another decade, another century passed, I had one page designer that would look at my photographs and be like, oh my gosh, I love your photographs. I want to add this to it. I want to put this on it. And by the time she was done on the page, it looked god awful. And if I gave her average work, she was like, whatever. And she just put it on the page. And sometimes that would look better in the page design than it was, because she was trying to add all this stuff and thought the idea of making an artwork better is by adding to it and building it up and making it bigger. It's like, no, sometimes it's about getting to the point, boiling it down, getting it down to the essence, getting it down to write what there is to it when there's no longer anything to take away from your image. Okay. And the best one, this is an old adage, and this goes on in your photographs as well, is all the elements that you put in your viewfinder are only as good as that weak spot. The eye goes to, another adage is the eye goes to the irritant. If you have a problem, if you have a flaw, if you have a misgiving in one of your photographs, once the viewer spots that, their eye is going to automatically go to that all the time. And it's going to make it kind of like disappointing to see all this good stuff, but the only thing that's going to stick in your mind, the only thing you can remember is that one flaw, that one thing. Think about gymnastics, ice skating, X Games, skating, BMX. You have to stick the landing. You can do the prettiest flip, you can do the prettiest jump, and if you don't stick the landing, everybody remembers that you fell. Okay. This is one of the next things. I was working with a classmate when I was getting my master's degree, and she was like, "Oh, my photos were so great." And I found that, students, a lot of times when you guys are learning photography, you're going to fall into one of two camps. Camp one is, "Oh, my photos are so great. This is amazing. I got to show everybody everything." Okay. And the other camp is, of course, "What do I got? I don't have anything. Only one. Nothing's good enough to show." All right. Early in my career, prior to digital, in newspaper world, if you wanted to get a job, it was customary to send off these slide sheets. You would send out your slides, and for certain jobs, you needed to send just a sheet of 20, and sometimes you had to fill a whole carousel. And so I started helping students. I started helping this classmate I was going to bring up and talk about, where she thought all of her photos were great. How can I pick these out? And I was like, look, early when in the digital analog era, when we were doing film photo and when we wanted to like send our work off to an editor, try to get a job, we had these slide pages. They had spaces for 20 slides to fit in an 8.5 by 11 slide sheet. And that became the number, that became the standard bearer for most of my generation, from the 70s to the 90s to the 2000s, and into the 2000 till the end of the film era. This became the standard kind of like thought process of, well, what's a good portfolio? Well, 20 images. Why 20 images? Because that's what would fit on your slide sheet. Okay. So I started thinking, I'm going to share with you guys now 20 images that were kind of a collection from, like I said, last night I went through and I found a hard drive that I was able to pull out from 2006 to 2016. All right. First set of images I'm going to share with you come from a project that pretty much ever since I moved to Victorville, I've been kind of always photographing the homeless, the needy, the disenfranchised, the people that just don't quite fit into the world the same way everybody else does. So the next thing, so let me just kind of like go through these, and I'll let you guys just kind of like take a look at these. If you guys have questions, just let Miss Shelby know, and I'll answer any questions that you guys have.
Any questions? Okay.
The other thing is, as one of the other, another thing that I've learned is the best way to become a better photographer is to look at a lot of photos and to take a lot of photos. And you got to learn this practiced way of looking at photos. It's not like a lot of you guys are growing up in the digital, as we're growing up and we're adapting our lives to our cell phones, we want to just scroll and slide through at a speed that's different. If you notice, I'm going to like hold these photos up for a certain length of time. And I want you to pay attention as I'm holding these photos up. Keep your eye on this image and study every little part. Where does your eye land first? What is your first reaction? What is your thought process? What attracts you? What repels you? And notice how long I'm holding these photos up. These are some older works, and this is if you can see a little difference in style. These are all film, analog, and I even printed them out on expired paper, which in some of these images it really helps, and in some of these images I'm not sure if it would stay in my final portfolio. I might go back and reprint them again. All the images there the print quality, I might go back and reprint on fresh paper or try to find a box of expired paper that matches some of these where it works well. Now we're moving out of the homeless stuff, the homeless project, and now we're kind of moving into just some general photography. And again, it's all coming back to that Bresson's decisive moment quote, which is, and the thing that I want to emphasize is not so much getting the right time, but also thinking about the precise organization, where all the shapes fall, how everything in the viewfinder is either going to help you inform you about the subject, or is going to help guide your, and I shouldn't say or, and is going to guide your eye towards the main subject in the photo. So pay attention to what's the first thing your eye leads to, and notice how everything else, where everything else is being used to guide your image towards that main subject and help you understand that main subject. All right, so there's 20 images that would fit. If I was in the film era, I would just be able to, like, you know, copy photograph those onto slide film, drop those into that, little slide portfolio, that sleeve page, and I'd be able to send it out and take a look at it. If you notice too, a lot of what you're taking, a lot of what I'm trying to share with you guys is those images that really kind of like walk you through the whole how to simple, and going back to that one quote I put up here, is getting to the point where there's just really nothing else to take away. Everything in that viewfinder, everything in these, not viewfinder, but everything in the frame, everything that I'm sharing with you has some sort of a purpose, has some sort of a reason to draw your attention or help you, inform you about the image you're taking a look at. Is there anybody? Well, actually, you know what? Before we get, I'm going to do something else in a second. I'm going to take you guys down another little journey that help you guys understand what I do as a photojournalist, and what I'm trying to accomplish when I'm out deciding what to take a photograph of, how I'm going to take a photograph it, and what photograph am I going to choose to send on. Okay. So the first thing, how many of you guys in this room, Miss Shelby, you'll tell me what the show of hands are. How many of you guys believe this old adage, this phrase? Is there anybody that's like never heard this before? Hopefully,
anyone never heard it? Okay, do you guys believe it?
Yes.
The whole class says yes.
Okay, you guys really always kind of think. Actually, the way I started to take a little, for a long time, I kind of believed this, and then I kind of like take a little fresh, different look at it. I don't really believe this anymore. Throughout my career, I've kind of learned that's not really a true statement. Okay, is what I've kind of figured out. It's not that, because my next thing is, let me go back here. How many of you guys would want to write a 1,000-word essay about one of the photographs that I just put up here?
I'll answer that for them. Nobody will.
I actually, in one of my classes, I made that a challenge. I was like, okay, if you guys, you know, if you missed an assignment, or if you had one of my backup emergency things for students, is you'd have to write a 1,000-word essay about one of the photographs. Nobody wants to do it. That's a lot of work. We don't want to write 1,000 words about photographs, but it's 1,000 different words. We all get to, when we look at photo, one of the things that separates out photography and particularly photojournalism is that every viewer, everybody that looks at this photograph, everybody that interacts with this photo somehow, they get to apply their own first word to it. Okay. When I went out to report on stories, there would be a reporter to go with me and they would find those 1,000 words. I mean, believe me, if I were to take this slideshow to an English class or a literature class, there probably would be people that would love to get the chance to write a 1,000-word essay about one of these photographs. They would go out and they would write everything that the people need to know about that story, all the facts, the figures, the quotes, all that information. But my job is to share something with people that only they can determine what's more important. So I'm going to give you guys a little quiz. Miss Shelby, keep an eye on the classroom for me. Watch what they're doing.
Eye on them. I'm keeping an eye.
I'm going to put a photo up on the screen and I'm going to ask them, everybody, don't shout it out. Don't let anybody know what it is. But when you see this image, I want you to think about what is the first word that comes to your mind when you see this image. In 3, 2, 1, 1001. All right. So what was that for? How many of you guys, Miss Shelby, ask your students in the classroom, what was the first word? Ask people, what was the first word that came to their mind?
Hand in the air. What's the first word? Crystal.
Wow.
What was it?
Wow.
Wow. Okay. Tressa.
Say cool.
Cool. Noah.
Light.
Light. Swanee.
Space.
Space. Damien.
Star Wars.
Star Wars. Anybody else?
Light.
Light. Nate B. What was it? Festival. Vivian. What was it?
Dance.
Dance. Any motion? Anybody else? Are we awake?
Hello.
Hello. Oscar, what would you think? Glow. Cool.
Hello.
Erica.
I saw light too.
Light. Okay. All right. There we go.
So really, we only had one word duplicated, right? Light.
Light.
Everybody else, you all came up with your own word to attach to that thing. When you read a story, they're telling you exactly what, they're telling you, they're filling your word with heads or with, sorry. They're filling your head with their words that goes with that story. Okay. With photojournalism and with photography, you're letting people interpret that story, interpret that situation, interpret that news event the way that their mind gets into it. We try to make them feel like they were there. All right. Now, this is where photojournalism becomes really important and really separates it out from the reporters that are writing stories. Is what is that feeling? What is that mood in that image? So I'm going to throw another image out here. 1 second. And I want you guys to keep track of, don't shout it out loud, but what is the first mood? What is the first feeling that hits your mind, that hits your soul when you look at this photo? In 3, 2, 1, 1001. All right. Go around the room. What was your first mood, first feeling, first thought with that image, or mood or feeling with that image?
We had sadness.
Okay.
Vivian. Despair. Gianni. Depressing. Swanee. Oh, you moved. Maury. You thought it was stupid, didn't you? Okay. Okay.
My head, the first word that came to my head was cold.
Cold. Okay.
Cold.
Maury.
Desperation.
Desperation. Noah.
This isn't a feeling, but I thought survival.
Survival. Okay. Anybody else? Damien, you moved.
70 cents.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right. Got some words there.
Yeah. And notice how, again, not too many. I mean, everybody's kind of falling in the same general area, but most of us are not coming up with exact identical things. And that's because every one of us has gone through this world at a different pace, a different rate. We all have a different set of genes in us. We're all designed to react differently to different things. That's the power of photography, is when we share this and when we start getting skilled at this, we start realizing how we can direct people to respond in a different way. I find it interesting. This is I wound up bumping into and I wound up getting to know Mercedes over the course of 6-7 years in a variety of different situations. And one thing that I came to appreciate out of this photo and out of working with Mercedes, nobody says thankful. This was a moment that Mercedes was very thankful and very appreciative. Gratitude is what came to her mind when she thought of this moment. Okay, and yeah, through the lens of thinking about our lives now and Mercedes' life in this era between 2010, 2011, a lot of us would put desperation, despair, sadness, but she put in this moment, at this opportunity, she put a lot of gratitude and a lot of thankfulness that she had that this water came in. I mean, the temperature that day was like 107, 108, you know, and getting that water was just really awesome. So that's what we want to accomplish. That's what I want to drive you guys to do, is to find that way or find those images that that give people the opportunity to interpret the situation for themselves, to apply their own sense of feeling and their own sense of mood to whatever it is you see. So that's what we want to do. Is there, let me, I don't want to escape out of this totally, but let me go back up here. All right, you guys still on there? So far, what kind of questions do you guys have? Or is there an image that anybody that I've placed up here that somebody would like to look at again, or maybe ask some questions about?
Any questions? Swanee.
Can you look at the one with the, like, it looked like it was at a cave?
She liked the one with like a cave, like, I think it was under a bridge.
There one?
One? Can you explain this one?
Yeah, this is actually one I loved. I searched out, I worked so hard to get this particular moment or this particular opportunity. And if I were to, as I'm starting to, like I said, I'm going to try to put together this collection of all of my images from, you know, well, maybe not second, third grade, but maybe early college, maybe about where you guys are at and learning photography now to where I am now. This one might not make the cut. And we'll talk about that in a minute, but this is Tony. And let me go back. This is Tony. Do I have
Actually,
any other Tony? What's that?
I've actually met him.
Have you really?
Yeah.
Tony was a guy that I came back to and photographed on several different occasions, but a lot of times, okay, I photographed the homeless. I started photographing the homeless because it was a problem in our community. And I really continued photographing the homeless, not so much to look at them like, oh, look at the woe, look at the desperation. And I started to look at the inventiveness, look at the creativeness, look at the alternative. A lot of these people are having the same intelligence level as you and I. They're applying their skills and they're applying their thought processes in radically different ways than what we apply our lives to. This was a shopping cart bridge that they built over a continually wet spot of the Mojave River, so they could walk from place to place. And every so often you'd see these shopping cart bridges pop along the river. And that was part of the inventiveness and the creativeness that I found with a lot of these people. They're not using their inventiveness, their creativeness, their problem solving skills to get a job, to pay a mortgage or a rent, or, you know, make sure that the lights are on. They're using it to figure out how to move across town, how to put a shelter up around themselves. And this bridge, these shopping cart bridges to me were such a metaphor for so many other different things. I think that anybody can look at a bridge and think about where it will take you what it provides for you, and think about what these people do. It's like, hey, I'm tired of walking through this wet water. We're just going to knock this shopping cart down. Okay. Now, like I said, I'm not sure if this one's going to make it in my final 20. Okay.
Why wouldn't it make it?
Yeah. Does anybody in the classroom want to give me an idea? Why would Mr. Quigg not want to include this image in their final collection? There's really two basic reasons when I look at this image, two basic irritants that once my eye hit it, it irritates me. And so now I might not use it continually. Anybody want to guess what these two irritants might be?
Ken, and you also had a question, Ken?
Yeah, I think it's contrast.
Contrast, okay. And then what was your question earlier?
Oh, what type of format and sensor do you use for all these images?
He wanted to know your format and your sensor for all these images and why.
Oh, well, most often I am photographing with full frame, 35 mil or full frame DSLR, because that was for a long time. But some of these were prior to when a handful of these are with crop sensor lens, because that was the best we had at the time when we switched to digital photography. This one I'm pretty sure was with one of the really early D1s. This one I know was with my D800. Okay, so this is a full frame. This is not a full frame image. The other thing that I do, a lot of my alternative work, this is 35 millimeter film, and this is medium format or 2¼ by 2¼ film. Anybody else got so contrast? It's not so much contrast to bother. I kind of like the top half being in silhouette, but it's more
Swanee?
exposure. Oh,
Let me ask, we have a couple other hands. Swanee, what'd you say?
I think like he's talking about why this one wouldn't work. I think it's because it doesn't give you the same feeling as the other ones do, where this one feels like more of like an art format, where the others feel more of emotion.
Did you hear that?
kind of, yeah, talking about like just the mood they're feeling,
Yes.
and it's a little more distant. I think the term she used was art.
Yeah, I think she's saying like this one's more graphic, where the other one,
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
The other ones show more of like emotional attachment to the characters that you see, the subjects, and you see in the photos.
Did you hear that?
Yes.
Okay, good. And then we have two more hands.
Sure.
Maury?
I think one of the irritants is the one straight plant.
The plant. They said that the plant kind of going toward
It's
toward
just
Tony. Yeah. And then Gianni?
My question was, what is your what inspired you to get into photography?
okay, Gianni, let me hold on to that. Let me explain. I'll get through these two irritants and then I'll talk about what really made photo happen. Hey, buddy. I've known Gianni for a long time. Yeah, I'm really glad to see you in Miss Shelby's class, because if you're not in my class, you need to be in Miss Shelby's class. So let me get into what brought me here, or what got me into photo in just a minute, but let me finish talking about the bridge photo here. The bridge photo, what really bothers me and why I might take it is I had to explain that this was a shopping cart bridge. Okay. I wanted my viewers to see better the shopping cart bridge. I did like, I walked when I knew that I was going, when Tony and I were walking around and I knew that we were going to go the route that we were taking, I knew we were going to go over the shopping cart bridge. I was thinking about the silhouette, and I was thinking about having it because, man, photographing in the desert in some of these situations along the river, your lighting situations are either like, it's like baseball home run hitters. You know, you're either swinging for the home run or you're going to totally strike out. Your lighting range is so huge between under the shade and in the sunshine. It's a very difficult situation to find. And when you do find it, it's glorious. It's amazing. But I wanted to have better, if I can you guys see my pointer over here? I wanted to have better exposure down here and stronger reflections in the light. Flash would have kind of like just really ruined it. But yeah, a little bit of this, except I like and I dislike this little triangle between the other plant and it's kind of like it makes a nice little triangle, but it blocks it off. It makes it feel like he's about to run into something.
Mhm.
The other thing that bothers me is if I am going to use shapes and lines, I want them to be complete. And what really bothers me is in the silhouette, it runs out of room at the top here. Does that make sense? And it kind of like, I know since Johnny's been in my classes, I'll talk about hot corners, and we don't like bright white things up in the corners and the edges of our lines. Everything is closed off in this nice dark area, except for up here. And that really kills it. So I'd love to have, and to the student that talked about contrast, yeah, that's huge in this lighting situation. And I think of it more of an exposure problem of wanting to get a better exposure up here and not so something that would balance with this better, a little bit better. I mean, if we would have done this in a little bit later part of the day when the sun was a little bit down and these were balanced a little bit, it would probably have been exactly what I was looking for. I'm not sure if I had the lens capability or if it was an issue of me not wanting to be ankle or knee deep in the water, to be able to back off enough to keep that whole little bridge shaped triangle to get the sense that you're under a bridge. Okay.
Let me jump in there. So of course now we have so many different ways of editing. We even
Right.
have AI as part of our editing. Can
Sure.
you explain to the class why you are not considering editing? Because of course you could brighten, you could select and brighten, you could select and darken, you could do
Yeah.
all those things.
And okay, I go back to my old darkroom days in photojournalism. And when there was this two-step process that we made a digital negative and then we made a print. And in that era, it was very much okay to, when we walked into the darker room, we would lighten certain areas and we would darken certain areas and what we would call today selective toning. The old rule of thumb in the very early digital days when we were like, oh my gosh, when us photojournalists switched to digital, we were like, oh my gosh. And then we had so many photographers got in trouble for over manipulating their images and misrepresenting the reality of it. Okay. One of our ethical standards was put nothing into the frame that wasn't originally in the frame and take nothing out of the frame that wasn't originally in the frame. So I tend to take a look at what I do in Photoshop is more of correcting than it is, I don't even like the phrase editing. Being the guy that certain is in the days, editing used to be taking the thought process of of us photographers in the analog era was editing was the process of taking your 4 or 5, maybe 6 rolls of 36 exposure film and choosing 4 or 5 best images to explain that story. Okay, that was editing, was taking, your 120, 140, 2,000 images and collecting them into a collection of 4, 5, and 6. Printing is what you guys now call editing. Okay. And I will still do a certain amount of controlling my highlights and my shadows. I'll still do a certain amount of selective toning. In the old darkroom era, we called it burning and dodging. And I will tell you, if you guys are in the Photoshop, I will tell you never, ever, ever, ever use the burning and dodge tools in Photoshop. If you're going to selectively tone your images, there is a better way to do it. And this isn't a Photoshop class, so I won't go into it. But the idea is to present this image the way that your eye saw it. One of my other little mottos, Gianni might remember, is I'm always trying to teach students to think like a camera and see like a camera. When we get ready to share our images, we want to make these images look the way that our eyes saw it. Photojournalists, we want to get this image to look the way that our eyes saw it, not the way that our camera saw it. Because the manipulation era got so bad, or manipulation got so bad in the early era of transitioning for photojournalism, a lot of news organizations, no editing whatsoever. You shoot straight JPEGs and you send that JPEG straight out of camera onto your editors. I don't think that's the best. I think that's kind of an overcorrection. I think there's ways, there's areas. Our cameras are not as, do not have the, even our best cameras don't have the same latitude that our eyes do. Okay. And it is fair to bring down your highlights a little bit, open up your shadows a little bit. But you've got to be thinking in a correction mode, not in a creation mode. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yes.
You know, that it's about getting your images back to what your eyes saw. It's not about trying to create a different mood or feeling or trying to drastically, you know, there's a lot of times I have thrown away, I've walked away from like great moments that I should have photographed because the light wasn't wrong and or the light wasn't right. And I didn't want to deal with that. Does that make sense? I thought that it would be too manipulative to try to report that, or not okay, I would maybe not would have photographed that scene, but I definitely wouldn't have chosen it to move on to put into the publication stream. Does that make sense? So yeah, you want to make sure that and I'll just, because it's so important for my and for what you guys see in newspaper, what you see on TV, what you see in magazines, websites, especially social media things. I think it's so important for me to understand when the camera and when the photograph is telling the truth, and when the camera and when the photograph is not telling the truth. Okay.
That truth thing is really tricky.
Yes.
George, you have a question?
Well, he went into the whole digital and what the editor wants. Does he print himself, or is it all just he ships it digital? And I know when it was analog, did he give him a negative, or how did he get the work to the editor?
How do you get the work to the editor both in the days of film and the days of digital?
Yeah, in the days of film, you know, we photographed negatives, then we walked in the darkroom and we made prints. Oftentimes we would make if I went back here, I don't have one with me, but oftentimes too, we would make contact sheets that would, you know, if you'll go out, you buy a roll of 36 exposure film, you'd photograph 36 exposures, and then you would lay them out and you would print all 36 images in a contact sheet. And then you would walk those over to your editor, and then you would decide out of those 36 or 12, you know, medium format was 12 exposures, 35 millimeter was 36 exposures, and you would walk those out to your editor and you decide which ones to print. You would generally print, if you were going to publish 1 or 2 photos, you would probably print 3 or 4 photos. If you were going to publish 12 photos, you would probably print 15 to 20 photos, because sometimes you just want to see it blown up and sometimes you want to make a decision there. But that's what we did in the film era. In the digital era is what we would do. The way that I would talk when I was talking to subjects and people I'm photographing is they'd ask about, you know, what's going to get in the paper? How's it going to be published? Can I see I always avoided letting people see my images while we're photographing, while we're in the field. But I would tell people I don't get to choose what goes into the paper, but I definitely get to choose what doesn't go into the newspaper. So in the digital era, I would take, you know, some sports games, I'd take over 1,000 photos. Some news events, I would take 4 or 5 shots. Some images, you know, I'm generally happy if I got to take, like, again, thinking like a film photographer, I was generally happy if I got to take like 36. Those of us that shot in the film era, we still define things by 20 slides in my slide portfolio, 36 frames of film is what I would kind of like shoot for a you know, it's like, okay, I've covered this well if I've done 36 or, you know, 84, you know, 82, you know, 1 or 2 rolls of film. But in the digital era, I would take that and I would just cut it down to 12. And then we would submit our images either in order. In other words, my best photo goes first, my second photo goes second. If we were in a system that was like time oriented, the first one that got uploaded, the editor would understand was my favorite image. The second photo was my second favorite, yada, yada, yada. Sometimes image systems would work by file size or what got processed. So we would number them. 001 is my best. 002 is my second best. 003 is my third best. 004 is my fourth best. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And then
Yes.
sometimes, you know, like often what happened in the digital era and the website era is they would use 2 to 3 images to go with the story, and then they would build a portfolio or a slideshow of your whole 12 to 15 or whatever your take was.
We have a question, Kim?
When I worked for the Times, they did a lot of editing inside the company. Even cut and paste with the razor blade and the paper and all that stuff.
Okay. Did you have a question on that one?
Yeah, I was just,
Did you, did the paper ever do editing on your behalf?
Yes. Yes, we often, oh my gosh. Cropping was the big one. Tons of page designers would slice our images in half. A lot of page designers would design the page and they would leave a hole and then they would just drop in the photo in the space that fit. And some people took care in that. Some people didn't take care. You know, some page designers took care of that. The other thing is, oh man, early in my career, I worked with this really old guy that was an expert in the post-war World War II. And he taught me every little trick to manipulate your image, not to manipulate the image, but to work around some of the shortcomings in the print and translating the photographic print with the dot tone or the, you know, the press print. And yes, that would include little bits of paper tracing around highlights and shadows so that it would translate into dots on a piece of paper instead of silver grain on a film. Does that make sense? And some of it looks I was watching a documentary, and they showed a photograph that was heavily doctored to make it was poorly photographed. And you can tell the pre-press department tried to do some fixes, and you could literally see the pencil and the eraser scrubbings to try to make, and it's like you could tell they weren't trying to manipulate the image. They were just trying to get the viewer to be able to see the image, and they almost made it worse, if that makes sense. Because, you know, it was a photo of an airplane and some of the highlights. I know Miss Shelby talks about hating white cars and chain link fence in your photographs, and the same thing, you know, that white shiny aluminum aircraft just blended off into the sky of the overexposed sky, and they literally tried to draw a line in pencil so you could finish out the line of the aircraft. You know, we had to work a little in our digital era. Oh my gosh, you guys are so much closer to being able to see what the camera actually saw and to see what the photographer actually saw than what we ever were before. Let me go back. Gianni talked about where I began. Where did I start? What made me want to be a photographer? And, you know, this was so long ago, and this left such an impression on me that it's worth telling, is that I was in second grade, and my second grade teacher also, he filled his summers by being a wedding photographer. So is what he did in our classroom is he built a small little darkroom, and he would teach us little analog and little photographic processes as part of our science and chemistry project. And then after he did that, he told us, anybody who has turned in all their homework and anybody who got C's and above, you can choose to spend your Friday afternoon in the darkroom. And I wish I had a video to show you, but this is a true piece. This is a true photograph. What I'm showing up. Well, no. Okay. You're looking at a digital slide of an actual photographic print. Let me do this. This is an actual piece of paper. Okay. This has all sorts of light sensitive silver inside of it. And wherever the light hits it, it turns black. And wherever the light doesn't hit it, it turns white. Okay. And when you expose this paper to light and it stays white, and you think, it's a piece of paper and I put some light underneath it. You drop it in the developer, you drop it in the chemistry, and you watch this white piece of paper. It is like magic when that image forms. Okay. I saw that in second grade. How old are you generally when you're in second grade? You're usually like 7 or 8, right? I was hooked. I was like, this is all I want to do. I was like, so every Friday, man, my grades got so much better and my productivity in that class got so much better because I knew every Friday I could get in there and just do whatever I wanted to do. Coincidentally, there was my dad had a friend who was a photographer, and he was in the process of upgrading his entire darkroom. And when he heard that I was just so fascinated, when my dad heard that he was just so fascinated, that I was so fascinated with this, when my dad's friend was getting rid of all of his old darkroom equipment, getting all brand new darkroom equipment, and he just gave it to us as a family. And we literally built a darkroom in the kitchen, in the bathroom, set out our trays of processors in the tub. Enlarger literally sat on the toilet. I know Miss Shelby was talking about getting new enlarger, but can you imagine just setting it up on the toilet? And then, you're doing all this on your knees as you switch from the toilet to the tub to process all this. But I was hooked. I knew this was going to be a part of my life. And when I went to college, I should do that. Let me escape out of this. I really started I think like a lot of you guys, how many of you guys got into photography because of Photoshop?
Anybody get into photography because of Photoshop? Not one hand went up.
Not one. Wow. Okay. But
Oh, one hand went up. One
okay.
hand. Two. Gianni, really? 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 He said kind
Oh,
of.
yeah. No, I remember. I know Gianni. I know exactly what Gianni's talking about. Oh gosh, I keep getting okay. So I went to college with the idea, not so much that I wanted to be the next Ansel Adams, but I wanted to print and I wanted to do the darkroom work like Ansel Adams does.
Who didn't? Oh my goodness.
Yes. And it's like, oh, I wanted to photograph like Ansel Adams. And I went to a college program that specialized in just the darkroom and just the science of printing. And actually it was a program set up for large scale. It was program set up for like two things: large scale, like print, like photographic lab kind of projects, and really high end perfectionate, the absolute perfect print you could make, color, black and white, whatever. And it took me about 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks in college to realize that those guys that do this for a living, they probably spend 6, 8, 7, 9 hours in the darkroom. I talked to some guys on the production side and they would spend their entire day, they wouldn't see daylight. And then a guy got me the opportunity to photograph for the newspaper actually, no, not the newspaper first, the yearbook. And I was like, holy cow, you mean I could spend half my day going out to all the cool events, the cool activities, and being everywhere all the time? What was the movie? Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. And then spend the other half of my day in the darkroom. Boom, I was set. That's all I really wanted to do. I wish I could just walk you over into my darkroom, turn on the lights, and just make a print. Are there people in this classroom that have done the darkroom, the true film and developing part of photography?
I would say the vast majority of hands in the class went up. There's only
okay
that didn't.
For me, and I know every one of us is different. I know that some people, I get so excited and I show this and I see some people's eyes just glaze over like, yeah, whatever. But when you see that first print develop and when you see that first image, when your shadows come in and then your highlights start to fill in slowly, it's like, wow, I'm done. I'm hooked. This is a lifelong thing now.
It's magic.
It totally is. This is another thing. If I go back to the Bresson quote, the other magic that I learned to love about photography, and this was more when I started doing the more newspaper and yearbook oriented stuff at college, was that precise organization. The other piece of magic in photography is when you get to point out exactly, where's my other one that I really like? you get to point out exactly what you're like a magician, and it's like you're controlling that person's eyes. You're controlling that person's thought process. Does that make sense? These people are going to look at this image and they're going to love it. And why are they going to love it? Because I did this stuff. Okay.
Jim, we have a question.
Sure.
Ken,
Was that shot on the 16mm?
he wants to know the technical aspects of this. Was this 16mm?
No. Which one? Where were you? Which image were you on? This image?
Yes.
Yeah.
No, this is, I think this is 30. Like I said, these are all, most of these are 35mm format. Some of them are crop sensor, and I'm not sure what the total millimeters. I think it's 24mm, but I'm pretty sure this is 35mm.
Are you talking about the focal length?
Yeah.
The
Oh, focal length, like wide angle. No, it's probably, this is probably 24mm.
24? Ken?
No, you know what? He might be right. This might, because in this era, I also was using a lot of 17. I had a 1735 and a 24 24 early in my career, before we had quality zoom lenses. I had a 24mm and a 180mm, and I told people I could do almost any assignment with a 24 and a 180. But here, yeah, he might be right. This might have been with a 1735. It might have been with a 2470.
Ken?
The only reason I asked is because like the 10 to 18 that I have produces images like that.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, that could be very much, yeah, it's either a 24 or a 17. And I'll tell you what, when I have zoom lenses, I'm usually at, if it's a 2470, I'm at 24. If it's 1735, I'm at 17. If it's a 70 to 200, I'm probably at 200 when I'm using zoom lenses.
Any other questions? Okay, sorry. Keep going. No questions.
All right. Well, let me ask one more question about this. Anybody want to try to use Bresson's, that precise organization? What parts of this image tell you guys there's precise organization going on?
Maury?
The people standing.
Tressa? The man who's jumped into frame in the center. Okay.
Yeah.
George?
I have a question.
Question?
So image like this, when he was taking it for the paper, I'm assuming paper freelance. What's the start to finish, like from when how do you get the assignment and then you go out and take a picture like this and then you get it turned in? What's the time frame and how does that happen?
Well, in my era, I watched this change radically. The internet really changed things. I started off, we always knew every newspaper had a little bit different deadline. It might be 11 o'clock at night. It might be 9 o'clock at night. There's a stretch that I worked in an afternoon paper, which meant our deadline was 9 o'clock in the morning, which was really awesome because you generally photographed in the afternoon and you could get done whatever because you knew it wasn't going to be needed until 9 or 10, sometimes 8 o'clock the next morning. When the internet started to become a thing, it was what does as soon as possible mean? Sometimes as soon as possible means 1 second. I was covering a fire in the internet era. It became as soon as possible. What's the time frame? I remember covering a fire that I got on scene of the fire. I snapped a couple photos with my cell phone, sent them up to the editors so that they knew what they had and we knew what serious fire we were talking with. And as I'm continuing covering the fire, my sister from Atlanta, Georgia calls me and I'm like, normally I would not take a phone call from my sister while I'm covering a news event, but I also knew that my mom was very ill. And I was like, holy crap, any call from my sister means something bad happened with my mom, and I'm thinking this might be it. This is the phone call. And my sister's like, are you okay? I was like, what do you mean? She's like, I saw your photographs. And you're, what's going on with this fire? It looks like you're right in the middle of fire. I was like, holy crap, I'm still on the scene of the fire. My editors took my cell phone photo, sent it to the Associated Press. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution published that photo, and my sister saw it before I even finished covering the fire. Okay.
Wow.
So my sister from Atlanta, Georgia is calling to see if I'm okay, because I was publishing photo, because we were now in the nowadays we're in the real time. What's the minimum of time? Gianni could tell you, when we worked at Encore, it drove me nuts that we would always do this special project on the last Friday before a break. And so everybody would come in after school. We'd photograph from like 4 to 5:30, 4 to 6. We'd set our memory cards aside, and then we wouldn't come back for 2 weeks later. And that killed me, because you totally forgot what was special. You totally forgot what was interesting. Then you picked up, I mean, we literally had students come back and not even remember what memory card their images were. We'd come back for after Christmas break, and it's like, all that is lost. You're going to make your best decisions about what you photographed within the first 30 to 45 minutes after you photograph that scene. This one, the particular, now the next thing I wanted to get to answer his question about, how things got done is, I loved it when we were working at about a 50-50 mix. 50% of the time, I am deciding, I'm recognizing, I'm going out and deciding what is interesting to photograph, what is worthy to be a story. And then the other half of the time, the editors are saying, I need you to be at this location at 4 o'clock. I need you to be at this location at 6 o'clock. Okay. Sometimes that 50-50 mix would get really skewed. There were sometimes I was working in a newspaper, it was like 90% of the time, don't even bother mentioning anything that you want to do. They're going to give you a list. I think my record is I photographed 13 different assignments, 13 different time, dates, and locations to be on a certain day, and have those all turned around. Okay. That was like way shifted over. And then there's also times where it's like, it would get really switched, where it was like, hey, it's all on you. You got to have something by 9 o'clock. You got to have something by 4 o'clock or 11 o'clock. Just go out and come back with some sort of news. And I didn't like that either, because you need something to give yourself some traction. Does that make sense? But I liked it when it was a nice 50-50 split, 60-40, 70-30, one way or the other, where it's this particular story. This was really early in the Facebook, when Facebook became a thing and they started making little subgroups. This was the Santa Monica Ring Flyers Facebook group. And these were just a bunch of guys that went to play on the rings at Muscle Beach, the Muscle Beach section of Santa Monica. And this was really just reporting, and there was a couple of local guys that would come down for this. So, and actually this came from another photographer. She was like, I'm going to be working on this story. Do you want to just come with me and just because we've got, we're going to do this on a Saturday when we don't have other stuff. And do you just want to come for the fun of it? And I was like, heck yeah, this sounds cool. So yeah, this was kind of that mix of, I'm just going to go down and check out with these guys. A couple of these guys I actually still have friendships on social media stuff. Gosh, I haven't been down there to photograph these guys in several years, probably 4 or 5 years. But yeah, it was kind of a thing.
Damien, you have a question?
Yeah. How did you get paid? Like, does he get paid hourly or?
How do you get paid? The big question.
Right now, I am a freelance. So that's gig, W-9, however you want to describe it. A lot of newspapers up here, they kind of like have a flat rate, and you photograph, and you get that flat rate.
Can we go into that a little bit more? 'Cause
Sure.
I, under the assumption that, let's say you get like the front page image, that's one price. If you get like a picture later on in the paper, that's a different price.
Not so much anymore, and not so much at the level that I'm working at. Between Victorville and San Bernardino, it's just kind of like, hey, we just need you there. We might, and this is where it gets a little skewed. When you start working for the big, quote unquote, the big guns, that's very much the case. Rolling Stone is very famous. if you're shooting a cover project or if you're just shooting a story, and you are priced completely different when you're talking for a cover or a lead photo as opposed to the secondary and the inside stuff. Early on in my career, the other thing is, when I worked for the Daily Press, I was a salaried employee. As the chief photographer, I was the salaried guy. I was the closest thing to a photo editor, where it's also like work for hire. So, and that's the big difference too. When you're freelancing, you own you should. Every publication, everybody will try to buy up your image rights. You want to keep when you're setting up your original contract or your original agreement with somebody you're going to freelance with, make sure that you're keeping your image rights. I photographed something for the San Bernardino Sun over the weekend, and I get a call back from another newspaper in another area and saying, hey, can we use one of your photos? And I'm like, yeah, you can rent one of my photos. You can license one of my photos. And then I can pick up a little. So the San Bernardino Sun paid me the main money, but I'll pick up a little bit extra money after that. A lot of the big famous photographers you saw in the 60s and the 70s, they had that work down to a gig. And I knew guys that were just, they were able to maintain an income after, on 20, 30 years, actually in my MFA program, I had a photographer that one day brought out a print, and he showed us this print, and he was like, see that Mercedes in the parking lot? I was able to buy that Mercedes with the money I earned off of this photo, because it had been used in so many different advertising circumstances and so many different, it had been licensed so many different times. He was literally able to buy a Mercedes with that car. Unfortunately, in the digital era, we've switched over to penny stocks now. And nowadays, if he were to sell that, he was like, if I were to put that photo on the stock agency in the stock market, the photo stock market today, after 3 or 4 years, I'd be able to buy a pizza.
Can you go into that more? Because I think this is a completely different world that our students aren't aware of. So
yeah.
Okay, as a hired photographer, chief photographer for Daily Press, you are a salaried employee with benefits, all that kind of stuff. Like, I think everyone kind of understands that world. And then they would also supply you with the cameras and all that stuff because you are the hired employee and that's their equipment. But now as a freelance, you're going to be buying your own equipment. You're going to be the one with you're going to have to buy for example, Photoshop subscription if you were going to do any kind of retouching, lightening or darkening of areas. And now you are making individual contracts with these different outlets.
Ding, ding, ding. The other thing, don't forget too, is mileage and gas and car to get you to and from these different locations. As a staff photographer and as a chief photographer, we were given mileage expenses for all of our traveling. Okay. And the payoff to that is that's under the copyright law, that's called work for hire. So that means if anybody else wants to wants to use my images from there on after, it's the Daily Press, it's the San Bernardino Sun, it's whatever organization your work for hire with, they get to reap the benefits of any subsequent use.
Do you guys catch
Make
that?
sense?
So if he's a staff photographer, the images belong to the paper, and then he doesn't get to sell it to another paper. But if he's a freelancer, he has to pay for all of his own mileage, his camera, all that kind of stuff. His benefits, all that are on him. But then he has the right now to use it in different places, to sell it to different places. So it's a really different way of working. And I'm going to get into how competitive that is in just a second, but we have a question right here.
So this is kind of one of the questions on our sheet, but it's also a curiosity. When he's taking a photo, who does he view the client is?
Who is the client in your opinion? And
that is a huge thing, because photojournalism is one of the few places, and this is really important to underline, especially in today's world, as our whole model of how journalism and news is reported is shifting and changing. I am one of the few people where my client, my customer, is not the people in the viewfinder. Most often, when you're a wedding photographer, a portrait photographer, a baby photographer, an architectural photographer, a food photographer, the things you're photographing are the client, the customer. You know, my job is to satisfy the editors, and more importantly, is to satisfy the readers, the buyers, the purchasers of that newspaper or of that magazine or of that news website. I should start taking paper out of the name. If journalism is going to have a future, we have to admit it's going to be an online, it's going to be a digital future. Okay. And let's see if I have something. A lot of my homeless work, where's a good example? This isn't the best example, but this is still kind of, actually, wait a minute. Let me go all the way down. Do I have some of these bad? Yeah. This is actually a great example of Rich Kerr did not ask me to come photograph him as the FBI was coming to arrest him. Okay.
I'm sure you didn't.
I
Yes.
am not worried about making Rich Kerr, believe it or not, even before and after this, Rich Kerr and I would just sit down. I quit smoking generations ago. Yeah, total different century. But I would hang out with Rich Kerr and a couple other guys on their smoke break. You know, there was times when he was the mayor of Adelanto and they would take a smoke break before the meeting or after the meeting or between sessions of the meetings. I would go out and hang. We would just shoot the breeze. We would just chit chat, you know. But when he got arrested, I was not thinking of him as my client, as my the person that I need to satisfy in this. I needed to make sure that people understood that he was arrested by the FBI, you know, and I needed to make sure that I could report and tell people we aren't playing around, you know, that they weren't playing around. This wasn't goofing off.
Okay, couple of questions on that.
Sure.
How did you know to go to this site at this moment? Number one. And then number two, can you fill in for the students who don't know the story, just maybe a cliff note
Yes.
version of what's happening?
I was really mad. Believe it or not, I was very mad that I won a photo contest for this. I was like, you gotta be kidding me. Okay. The story is Adelanto has been a city that has been plagued by corruption and financial problems. And it just has a long history of struggling to operate as a city government.
That's a nice way of putting it.
Rich Kerr was elected to try to change that and to try to fix that. And one of the ways they were going to do that was they were going to jump on the legalized marijuana stream. And they were going to make Adelanto the California hub, capital, center of legalized pot distribution, growth, production, and distribution. And unfortunately, it didn't work out. Every one of these guys on the city council, they realized that when you're trying to make an illegal thing legal, there's still a lot of people with habits and customs of illegal practices. And these guys just got sucked down. You know, these guys just kind of like, they thought they were like swinging the big business deals. And they were really, they were small bit players, and they just got hooked up by the big corruption scandals, you know, and they just got sucked in by corrupt people.
And then how are you notified this is going down? I guess it's not how do you get your clients, but how do you know where the stories are?
Yeah. And that's a good comparison. Notice that this started off with a decision of who your client is.
Mm-hmm.
This is very much like what happens in when you're a journalist working in a newsroom, as opposed to working as a commercial photographer in some commercial setting. You have to hustle. You have to get out there. You have to shake hands. You have to get to know people. Like I said, I would hang out at, like, prior to meetings, Rich Kerr always had a good joke. Rich Kerr and I always got along. I remember the night he was elected mayor, they asked me to actually come to his home and photograph his election party. Okay. And that was part of the news reporting. And we would talk ball teams, we would talk sports, you know, all sorts of stuff. And you created this trust with the newsmakers of the community. This one came about because we had an investigative reporter at the Daily Press, and he had an inside source with the FBI. Now, the funny story about this is that this reporter was a much younger reporter and much like really more into it, or just, he didn't have a lot of experience. And so everything he thought was the biggest deal because it was his first deal at everything. He said, hey, I got this source at the FBI and say they're going to arrest Rich Kerr. I said, okay, just tell me, you know, just let me know if whatever you hear, let us know. Let us, you know, we'll find a way to get a photographer there, give us whatever kind of heads up you can. And about 3 months later, again, oh, the FBI, I got an informant in the FBI, told me this is going to happen. It's like, wait a minute, you told me that 3 months ago. Let's see, let's keep me posted. It was almost a year and a half. And then finally, the reporter calls me up and said, my informant says it's tomorrow morning. Can you be at this location? Can you be at this address? Sometime between 7 and 11 a.m. And so I literally, I was like, first of all, I was like, are you sure? You know, this is like almost once a month updates. They're going to do it. They're going to do it. And it never happened, you know. And finally, sure enough, I showed up like 6:30, quarter till. And I just sat in my car and I waited about an hour and a half, 2 hours. And then all of a sudden I saw one black vehicle, then two black with government tags. And all of a sudden I saw three and it was like, yep, here we go. You know, and
I have another question for you. I'm asking more questions on the students. So there was a movie up with Jake Gyllenhaal years and years ago about competitiveness with photo. I'm sure you watched it.
Oh, no, I didn't. And I remember that coming out and now I can't even think of the name of it, but it was about the,
it's basically, he was,
yeah,
it was very, I'm sure it was very fictionalized, but he was creating the stories that he could then photograph for the newspaper. But it went to the idea of competition with other photographers.
Yep.
Because, you know, the idea was to be the first one on the scene. Therefore, you got the best shots. Therefore, you got the most money. Kind of went, I'm very much simplifying it.
Yes.
Anyone see that movie? Yeah. Yeah, it was, a dark movie.
Yes.
Nightcrawler.
That's it. Ding, ding, ding. Thank you.
Yeah. What is the competition like with other? I mean, I know you're high desert, so it's a little bit thinner, perhaps. But like, if you were to go down the hill, what's the competition like?
It varies because, you know, there's a certain amount. It's always in the back of your head. Does that make sense? Whenever you go show up at a news event where there's, you know, like hundreds of photographers, oh my gosh, one of the things I used to do is the Daily Press, where they actually let me keep my rights to sell and move on, was NASCAR. NASCAR was a kind of a thing where the Daily Press was pretty kind and was like, yeah, if you want to go photograph it, we'll publish your images, but you know, it's not going to be on your work time. Does that make sense? So they got me the press credentials and kind of let me be me. But when you get down to NASCAR and there's like literally 70 other photographers, you're really thinking about, I've got to out photograph every single one of those guys. There is that competition. But then you got to kind of buoy that with the fact that, hey, every one of us has our own little income stream. Every one of us, very few of us are in situations where we're directly going to be competing with, because a lot of times when you're at those big, massive news things, you're all there for your own purpose. You all got your credentials and you all got in there because somebody wants you there. Does that make sense? And somebody, at least one person, is going to look at you first. The next trick is how do you get your images distributed after that main source? Does that make sense? That's where you start thinking about the competition. And then, of course, everybody wants to win the contest and the awards, and everybody moves your career. And every time you take that awesome photo that everybody remembers, then more people are going to call and ask you to be their first guy there. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And there is that level of competition. I can tell a few stories about people. Another spot where it's really competitive and where that Nightcrawler really does hit closely, TV news. Oh my gosh. the guys, and especially in the LA market, more than in the LA and the New York market, way more competitive, because a lot of those guys are freelancers and a lot of those guys are just trying to get that first shot up there. So they're hoping these things, they're really looking for the accidents. They're gonna, if the TV news starts at 11 o'clock, they're really looking for the stuff that's going to start breaking at 9:30, 10:30, so they can be live on that 11 o'clock thing, or 4:30, so it can be prepared, so it's up and on by 5 o'clock news.
What's the kind of money for those kind of photos? I know I'm getting into superlatives, but
And that, because I kind of switched to teaching and kind of got out of it, I'm
not sure.
no, it's hard for me to say, because the other thing is that every news organization is going to, they're all going to try to get it for the lowest price possible, but they're all willing to grab it if they can. They're all willing to give you much more if they can get it first. Does that make sense?
Yeah, we have 3 questions. So George.
Well, mine's kind of a 2-part. One's a little personal, and then it segues. So this particular photo, you said you went on smoke breaks, you kind of knew him.
Yeah.
Did you ever feel the urge? Obviously you didn't, but did you feel the urge to call him and give him a heads up? And then second part to that is, with what I used to do for the fire department, did you ever listen to the scanner to try to jump calls and get that kind of edge?
Yes. Scanner at question, yes. Scanner was always running in the newsroom. And if you ever see those old movies about TV news, about the old newsrooms in the old era, yeah, we had TVs with all the news broadcasts on. We had police and fire radios on. Everybody had their own sources, especially when text messaging started to become a reliable thing. Oh my gosh, we all had contacts with everybody. Kerr kind of came up so fast. I was literally walking out the door like 7:30, 8 o'clock, maybe even 9 o'clock at night. And I know that it's at 7 o'clock in the morning, that I wanted to be there at 7 o'clock in the morning. And quite frankly, I wasn't that close to Rich that I would turn around and try to give him a heads up or try to, scoop him. I was like, no, this is, my ethics wouldn't even let me, the other thing is just being that impartial observer would not allow me to do that.
Makes sense.
Hey, we have I have another questions on that too, but I'm going to come back to that. Sierra, what's your question?
So for his, I guess the more of the freelance and even working for the Daily Press, what steps would he suggest that someone would take to start getting into that? The more business side of it, I guess, employer side of it.
Okay, so I'm gonna have a corollary. So she wants to know how you would get into freelance photography, and as a related question, I guess how does freelance work in 2025? Are we with the advent of citizen journalism now?
Yeah, well, that's the big thing. Just again, going back to my old teacher, my old professor, that was like, in the stock era, in the film era, in the stock agency era, one photograph propelled him to buy funded him enough to buy a Mercedes. Nowadays, it would buy you a pizza. The value of our work, because so many people just send, and I tell you what, man, it came up the other day. Somebody just sent in a photo of the newspaper and they just ran it. I got a friend of mine that does a lot of fashion, well, not fashion photography like you see in Vogue and all that, but she does children's clothing for catalogs and for websites. Like if you're going to go on Temu, if you're going to go on Amazon, you're going to find that shirt for your little daughter, for your son. She's probably photographed it, right? She and a friend of her, and they both started, both of these. Well, she started off as what we'd call a momgrapher. In other words, I got into photography because I had a baby and I loved taking pictures of my daughter or my son, and it turned into this whole incredible business. All right. She and another friend went out to just do a photo session with their kids just for fun, posted them on social media just for fun. Okay. About 2 weeks later, they got contacted by the people that made that particular t-shirt or whatever it was, whatever fashion item they were wearing, and said, hey, we would love to use your photos on our social media and ad campaigns. You know, I tell you what, can we use your photo and we'll send you a coupon, or we'll send you 25, $50 if we can use your photo. And the one mom that was just doing it for fun and just thought that she was going to do it for hooks and just kind of a thing, you know, just because it was a Saturday afternoon romp and kind of a fun thing. So like, yeah, oh, $50, great. You know, look at that. We went out and had fun and I got $50 to boot, you know. The other photographer that had the more advanced business, she was like, let me put you over to my agent, and here's the way that I contract and here's the way I license it. She wound up making $1,500, $2,000 off of that photo session. And she wound up turning it into a situation where these people now call her to do the photo. You know, they'll send her the clothes and say, can you send us back 20 photos, 8 photos, 12 photos of these particular clothing items? So she turned it into something that she's doing on a quarterly basis now, winter, spring, summer, fall. They'll send her a certain set of clothing. Can you get a kid to wear, you know, can you get the kid to wear these? And yeah, she made thousands of dollars instead of $50 because she was set up in the business. She had that business mode. She had the licensing mindset in her head already. The other photographer was just in it and was just excited to get $50 for it. Does that make sense? And these businesses all over, both on the advertising side and on the journalism side, have that mindset. If we can get it for $50, if we can get it for $25, we'll get it for free if we could. And then they also know that if they want to get it out first, if they want to get it, if it's really important, they've got no problem operating with your business model.
We had a couple questions. Damien, did you have a question I didn't get answered?
Sure, so.
Okay.
Well, I have an add-on to that question.
Okay.
What about how, when he started working at the Daily Press, did he reach out to them? Did he intern?
How did you get into the Daily Press? And if someone were interested in photojournalism, how would you start today?
That's getting, you're right in the middle. That's getting redefined right now as we speak. My old school way of doing it was I would put together the best 20 image portfolio I possibly could, and I would mail it off to any editor in a driving distance. Does that make sense? Any publication, anybody willing to look at this stuff, I would. And then I would go to every conference. I would go to every workshop. I would go to every training that I could possibly afford. And I would shake hands with as many editors and other experience or more photographers that are a step ahead of me. I would shake hands and I would make as many friends as I could and say, hey, if you know of an opening, let me know. Hey, can I slot, you know, just like you're about Hollywood with scripts, you know, hey, can you look at my portfolio? Can you get so-and-so to look at this set of images for me? And just get your images and get your work in front of as many people as you possibly can without being that used car salesman, without being too needy, without being too pushy. And then you would hope for phone calls. Does that make sense? The other thing that you would do is go out and just photograph whatever event you can and say, hey, oh my gosh, this happens. Do you want this? You know, I'll give it to you for this amount of money and I keep my rights, you know.
Couple of questions on that. How
Sure.
would you do it today? Because I don't even know about mail anymore. How would you do it today? And then after that, can you talk a little bit about how they would understand licensing?
Okay, with licensing,
Go to the first one first. How would they start today?
how would you start today? Instagram. Take your Instagram very seriously and very professionally. Put nothing but your best work up on your Instagram. Know the difference between reels, posts, and stories, and make sure that what's going to stay there forever and for always, and that professionals are going to look at to determine if they should hire you as a photographer. Make sure that that's nothing but primo stuff sitting up there. If you have to have your personal account to put up your fun, hey, we're going out for pizza tonight, or oh my gosh, look at my grandson or my son. Put that. I mean, I wrecked a relationship with an editor because I sent him a whole bunch of updates when my son was competing at a national level for wrestling. Okay. I was like, oh, I'm so proud as a dad. And he was like, if I see one more picture of your kid wrestling, I'm not gonna look at you for photography work. Okay. Especially a lot of you college students, you're at an age where it's like anything goes and go for it, but some editors might get turned off by that. So make sure that stuff doesn't stay up there very long.
That's like a segue. My next assignment on Monday or Tuesday in this class is social media. So we're going right into that.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little
And-
bit about licensing? Like how would someone today know the licensing aspects of this?
This is an area where I wish that I had more expertise, because just the way that my life turned between college and having a career as a photojournalist, being a staff member, being a paid full-timer on the staff was just the much saner, more correct choice for me and for my life situation. And I had a professor tell me, you really should just don't worry about it, walk away and just, do all freelance. And sometimes I regret that. But for the situation I was in at the age that I was in, that was a necessity for me. So, but the licensing and the business side of the photography is you've got to think of your images as both works of art that get more valuable as they go on. And you also have to think of your photography, especially as a photojournalist, you got to think of your photography as fresh fruit that's only going to get more stale, more rotten, more whatever. Does that make sense? And a few of them become those things that everybody comes back to and keeps wanting to license and redo. I read a little bit about a photographer that I don't remember what it was, but it was from back. There's a photograph he took during World War II. So we're talking about another century. But that became used, that funded his retirement because that image was used in textbooks to teach World War II history so often. And it was so common. It was such an iconic image that it funded him all the way through his retirement. Okay. And it was a constant sort. You hear TV and record or the TV industry, a lot of the contract abuse and the recent strikes were about residuals and what they get out of reruns, and how streaming is going to play into that. I would find some sort. I know that on social media, on Instagram, there's a guy that I follow. It's called A Photo Editor. And he puts a post up like once a day about the business of being of how photographers get into the business of being photographers. Does that make sense? And a lot of times he's just sharing great promotional work. And a lot of times he'll talk about the fees and the structuring and the licensing. And he'll put up little mini blog, kind of like Instagrammed blog posts about the business. And I'll try to, over the next couple of days, I'll find a link to it and send that to you.
Thank you.
As a guy that you can follow. And I'll also look at, the other thing is, I think this is a little bit more old school, but there was this American Society of Magazine Photographers. There's also the National Press Photographers Association. And there's a couple other that I can't think of off the top of my head. That are associations and organizations that you can join that will give you a lot of business tips and a lot of licensing fees and a lot of and present workshops about how to run your photographic business. There's also people that will go out and get agents or will hire consultants to help set up the groundwork for your business. But then you got to pay a fee, like agents. They're going to take a third of whatever you make from what sometimes they'll even take a third of what you got outside of what the agent provided you. Does that make sense? In other words, they're just going to take a third of your gross. But sometimes you make enough money that you're happy and willing to give up that third.
When you say agents, I'm thinking are you talking like associations like AP or Reuters or anything like that? Is that what you mean?
No, I'm talking on the news side. Yeah, you would want to get into an agency. Associated Press isn't really truly an agency. They're an association of other newspapers.
Okay.
Like that was my big thing. That's where I got a lot of stuff on worldwide distribution, is because if if you're working, if a newspaper, if you're a member, Associated Press newspaper, you can pull so much stuff of the national news, but you have to be able to offer so much stuff on a daily basis. Does that make sense? It's kind of a sharing platform. It's a really old school version of a sharing platform. You have to give in order to be able to get. But other agencies like Reuters, Getty is the big one. Getty just bought the snot out of everything. And Getty is the biggest distribution agency out there. And if you can get yourself into Getty, then you can be pretty well set to a certain area.
Read a question, Kim?
I was always told when I worked for the Times newspaper that if he didn't do his job, people like him didn't do his job, we wouldn't have a job because there was nothing to put in the paper.
Oh, interesting.
Yes, I actually, I would talk when I was a chief photographer and I had a staff of 4 or 5 photographers. That was a constant message. Why do I have to do a story about gas prices? Why do I have to do a story about, why do I have to photograph this? Why do I can't photograph my dream? You know what? There are one of two things. A, we don't pay you to sit in the office, and B, there will be somebody that is willing, interested, and excited to do these sorts of things. And that should also be a motivator too. If you want to go photograph that dream job, if you want to go photograph that dream thing, Steve McCurry was one of the most famous photographers. He took the photograph of Afghan girl, and basically is what he did is he went to college, just like you guys are doing right now, just like I did. His dream job was to work for a newspaper, got a job at a newspaper, and realized his dream job was to travel. His dream job was India, Pakistan, and all these worldwide famous things. He lived like a monk for a year. All of he got the cheapest possible apartment, cheapest possible food, didn't get into socializing, just every penny he saved for an entire year so he could save up and earn a ticket to India. Okay. And at the same time, he went to every workshop. He did like I was saying. He sent his images to every photographer, every editor, everybody he knew. And then he said, you know what? Then he told these guys, I'm going to India. I'm doing a photograph, A, B, C, D in India. And I'd like to sell you these images. And that's what set up his career that we know we knew Steve McCurry to be.
He messed up though. He did. I'll show you guys. He
yeah. He
landed on his feet though, because now he's a fine art photographer.
We always looked at we kind of made a mistake with National Geographic as looking to them as the penultimate photojournalism goal. And they were bad. When we talked about the ethics of photojournalism, there are numerous examples of National Geographic defying. I mean, they were one of the biggest to manipulate and distort the truth with their images. And Steve McCurry got sucked up into that as well. Steve McCurry's reputation just really got lambasted in the digital era. And he's a lot of the reason why I said earlier, a lot of news organizations won't accept images unless they were photographed as straight JPEG and sent straight out of camera.
Kim?
Then during newspaper president, which I retired in 2004. A lot of the co-workers was mad because the editors and the president got paid way more money than the people that broke their back doing the hard work, which is the president.
Ding, ding, ding. Yeah, that's one of the, it takes, that was a big thing. The other thing too, I watched the whole business of print journalism just fell apart in the social media era. Like I said, I could trace my career back to second grade, my thought and my interest in photography in second grade. It also, a lot of through my junior high era, I delivered a newspaper, the old classic paperboy that you see in the 1930 movies kind of a thing. And so I always had this love of the daily newspaper, but they said TV news was going to ruin the newspapers. It didn't. They said, oh, 24-hour cable TV news is going to ruin newspapers. It didn't. The internet's going to ruin newspapers. Internet didn't ruin newspapers. Social media ruined newspapers. Advertisers figured out they could put their information up on social media sites for free instead of buying newspaper ads. Craigslist killed newspapers because people realized they could put their ads up on Craigslist or offer up for free and didn't have to buy a classified ad in the newspaper. All of our revenue just got flushed down the toilet and everything that we put on Facebook and Twitter, like we were guided to, actually all that revenue and all that attention, all those eyeballs went to Facebook and Meta and X instead of to us. And then when our revenues went down, all of us reporters and all of us journalists were like, yeah, you can't give our products away for free.
So Jim, what do you feel is with the advent of like the citizen journalist,
Yeah.
And Instagram, Facebook, X, etc., what do you think is the future of photojournalism?
I think the future of journalism is going to be, you're going to have to be an entrepreneur. You're going to have to be in business for yourself. You're going to have to be your own boss. I think the future of journalism and photojournalism is going to be on websites. I know there's a former reporter that is now starting his own little things like Patreon. I can't think of the name he's working with. Something Stack.
There's Substacks too.
Substack. Yeah.
Substack.
Where you've got to get people to subscribe to you.
Mhm.
And I think that you're going to start seeing little organizations nest up within Substack and Patreon because I don't think journalists can work well without photojournalists, and I don't think photojournalists can work well with without reporters and investigative reporters. It's just too hard to be a one-man band for everything. And there's going to have to be some ways that you can find some collaboration with reporters to be able to build your own thing. And I think that that's going to be a lot of it, is being able to build your own thing and recognizing when it's time to start joining forces with other people building their own things and finding that way to get people to subscribe to you. There's a lot more people that will, sign up for a $5-6 a month thing to subscribe to and then forget that they subscribe to it. And
Right.
I think that's going to be the future, is getting people to subscribe or, and just using, I was given some guidance to this guy that's starting his own journalism thing. It's like, you can't use X and Twitter to tell people what you reported. You've got to use X and Twitter and Instagram to tell people what they need, why they need to subscribe to you. You've got to use your social media to say, why do you, and then you got to redirect people. Hey, you want to subscribe to my real stuff? Go here, Yeah. And I think that, there's going to be an element of the influencer that you're going to have to start picking, but that gets tricky because the influencer business is all about marketing and advertising. If you want to be a journalist, you don't want to be involved with people understanding that you're reporting on things because you're getting paid to. That's the worst thing. That's the worst thing you can get into. But I think there's got to be an element of that influencer style. I'm getting people to look at me because I'm taking awesome photos and I'm choosing the things that people want to look at. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But there's got to be somebody other than, you can't say, this arrest of Rich Kerr was brought to you by whatever, marijuana business.
Right. Well, that kind of stuff always sells.
Yes.
Any questions? Any questions? We have a couple sports photographers in here, and I was wondering, I saw you had a group of images on your sports photography. I wonder if you'd show them to us.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Did I leave that up? No, I didn't. Because really, that's when I switched to when I went to teaching Encore full time, and I was freelancing for the Daily Press. This isn't really my sport, but yeah, this is almost this collection of photojournalism is almost all of my sports stuff. And again, we're going to follow back to that Bresson decisive moment, precise, finding its proper expression, finding its significance, and putting it all together at that decisive exact moment.
And along those lines, I know my sports photographers could answer this, but how do you get a press pass?
I did it because I was working for the Daily Press.
Okay.
Okay. Sometimes you can do it by going to the school and telling them that you'll be willing to share photos with the school. It's better. Okay. And sometimes even that's better. It's even better if you go to like the coaches or the parents. A lot of schools will have some sort of a booster organization. You might be able to do it through a booster organization, best through a coach or an athletic director. If you go to a principal, he's going to be too busy with way too many other things, and he's not going to want to get involved in that. Does that make sense? And then they're going to start questioning, why does this guy want to come photograph our kids? You know, but if you work through the teams, if you work through the coaches and the athletic directors, they'll probably give you passes. The daily, you know, other news organizations may or may not give you a pass. If they know they're going to be there for a specific event. Does that make sense? If they're contracting with you, they'll work it out. I did a job for the Sun a couple weeks ago, and it was an event that required passes. And at first they weren't going to give it to me because what the Sun did is they just called the event hosting the tournament and said, yeah, we're going to have photographer 1, 2, and 3. And I was giving them my name. And they were like, we don't have a James Quigg on the list. You're not on the list. I was like, but then the editor, oh, just tell them you're photographer 2 or you're photographer 3. And they were like, oh yeah, we have a San Bernardino Sun photographer 3. Here's your pass. So that's how it might work. Do not try to just sneak your way onto things. You don't want to you don't want to, you know, sneak into something and photograph once and then never be able to do it again. Does that make sense? And I've known people that have done that. So you don't want to do that.
If you have any questions about the photos, just raise your hand.
This was a crazy covering this. This was a soccer game, and they got like 4 inches of snow in the course of the hour-and-a-half game. It was insane.
It's a mess.
My lens was fogged for 2 days after that. I had to set it. I had to like go through this whole system to air it out and to get all the moisture out of and condensation out of the lens.
Bag of rice.
Oh, this is a VVC game, by the way.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it looks like BBC. Do you have a favorite thing that you like to cover if you had your chance to do anything? You choose one thing over other, like
no, it actually the answer for me, the answer is whatever I didn't do or whatever I haven't done recently. Does that make sense? I love photographing football, but by the time you get into the end of the season, you're like so sick of football, you can't wait to photograph a basketball game or a wrestling meet. Does that make sense? So I always look forward to and I also really miss the old days when we were like really 100% on everything. I love that crossover season when we were photographing preseason for one sport and we're photographing tournaments and championships for the other sport. And you got to do a mix all day long. Man, that really just got you, because there's a certain perishable skill set that you have to practice and refine every time you change sports when you're doing sports photography. Like your timing for football is different than your timing for a basketball game and different for wrestling or soccer or baseball or whatever you're doing. And when you're having to do like multiple games in a day or in a week, photographing 4 different sports, you're like, your mind is like just really on it. And it's so much fun. But when you're in the middle of the season, it's football game after football game after football game, you kind of like get into this, you know, like hamster on a cage kind of feeling. Does that make sense?
We have a question, Chris.
When photographing sports or like, oh, I know that person. When you photographing football games, what lenses would you burn with?
What lenses do you suggest for photographing sporting events? Lens focal length, probably.
Yes. Get the most amount of lens, the biggest possible aperture that your wallet will provide. I love 300 2.8 was like my main thing, and then I had converters, matching converters, so I could shoot. One lens would be a 420, another one was just short of 600. Does that make sense? And then I have to give up apertures every time I put on one of those extenders.
Chris?
Also, when using a low aperture, especially during sunlight, do you use an ND filter to combat the high shutter speed?
Do you use ND filters?
No. I've been shooting video. I've been in some situations where it's like, I should really have some ND filters right now. I get ND filters, but a lot of times, this is a great example. Well, no, it's not, because this was a rainy day, but this is wide open. I kind of like prefer to shoot wide open aperture, lowest ISO I possibly can, and then get the shutter speed to respond to those two situations. And usually if you're doing a full daylight ball game, or do I have a good example of that? Oh, what happened to it? I think I took it out. Okay, this is a pretty good example here. It is really easy to go out on a sunshiny day and be able to put your aperture at 2.8 and your shutter speed at and your ISO at 200 and be able to get by, or 400 and get your shutter speed to be 1/1000th, 1/2000th, 1/4000th of a second. Yeah, I can get around. I can just lower my ISO as much as I'll try to run really low ISOs if I have to. But a lot of times when we're photographing in certain situations, where are we at here?
I'm gonna ask about the fire ones too in a second.
Oh, sure. Here it's getting a little dicey because I'm trying to be at 2.8. I don't want my ISOs to be at 1630. I have so many people that just automatically daylight. They're putting their cameras up at 3200 ISO. You
Not
got to
my house.
understand a reason why ISOs and what's going on with an ISO and
It's a
what's
sales pitch. It's a
what's
sales
that?
pitch. It's a sales pitch. That's all it is.
Yeah. No, an ISO, you're not making your sensor more sensitive to light. You're just amplifying, you're turning up the volume, and there's distortion, there's feedback. If anybody loves heavy metal music and if anybody loves hard rock, you understand what feedback and distortion is, but you don't want it in your photographs. It ruins, it kills your photographs, I've also learned too that getting a good, sometimes, especially in the modern, probably since the third, fourth generation, when we started getting to full frame sensors are more common. You will get a less noise in your image if you're getting a proper exposure. And your shadows might look horrible, but your highlights will still look okay.
We have a question real quick,
Sure.
Damien.
What do you like to use more often? Crop sensor or full frame?
Okay, we have the crop sensor full
Oh.
sensor question.
I would generally tell all of you to get full frame cameras, whether it's mirrorless or DS. And now I would also recommend everybody just stick with DSLR. It was made to be a digital camera. Mirrorless. DSLRs was really just film cameras with the film swapped out with a sensor. Okay. Mirrorless cameras were designed from the ground up. Try to always have that mirrorless or that full frame. But I tell you what, I've become quite addicted. I've got a crop sensor D500 and a 300 millimeter lens. That's what this camera was taken with, or this image was taken with that combination. And I've really become addicted to it. I've gotten my eye set to this particular setup and it just works, and I shouldn't, because, and honestly, when I'm working for these website and when I'm working for news organizations and news websites, my pictures aren't going to be published large enough for you to recognize the loss of detail between a crop sensor and a full frame sensor. Is what I'm giving up color accuracy and color precision, which again, depending on what somebody's laptop is, or if they're viewing it on a phone, they're not going to notice.
Aiden, are you at the All-Star game next Saturday?
I have got a couple of text messages as we've been talking. I've gotten a couple of text messages from my editor. So I don't know what I'm doing coming up.
Tripod, no tripod?
Tripod, no tripod.
Monopod. With my 300 millimeter, I use a monopod. With my 70 to 200, I don't use. Oh, another thing for sports photographers, work with the coaches, get to know the AD staff and the other staff. One thing that I've discovered is really nice when I've developed a relationship and a friendship at different sports locations. I have found that teams are totally okay with me stashing a full bag of camera gear somewhere in a safe little corner of the stadium or the football field or the gym. Basketball, I generally keep my stuff with me, but I've found it's so much easier when a guy, because when I want to be photographing with the 300, I can set down the other lenses in a safe location and then go back and swap out. Like at the end of the game, when I want to get reaction shots with a wide angle lens, there's a safe location. I can stash my camera. NASCAR was awesome. When I photographed at NASCAR, you could rent lockers and you could swap out. You could come back to the pit area, go to the press room and swap out your gear. And it was in a locked locker,
Jim, we have about 5 minutes left.
All right, sure.
Can we show some of the fire images? We do have a
Sure.
fire captain in our class too.
Okay. Is what I should put up. And again, yes, following the smoke, following the fire scanners. That's how we get on these things. I will, since we got about 5 minutes and this is getting kind of old, but what I did my master's thesis on was started with the blue cut fire. Let's go back here. And so the blue cut fire was this is one of the images. This is when I was telling you my sister from Atlanta called me as I'm photographing this photograph. Like just after I clicked this frame, my sister called. Okay. I arrived on the funny story about the blue cut fire is we had just finished the 8,000 acre pilot fire. If anybody's a fire person, if you understand and memorize these things, the call came out for a fire and all of the younger news staff was like, oh, it's good for another fire. And I was like, come on, there's never going to be, we just got done with it. There's never big fires back to back. This fire's 12 acres. They're going to put it out at 45, 50 acres. All right, I'll go, but it's not going to be a big major news event. And I was there when that thing ballooned I got there when it was 12 to 18 acres. And by the time my day was done, that was a 10,000 acre fire and it finished up at like a 26,000 acre fire. Okay. But as I'm covering this fire, and this is literally, I'm standing at the interstate, it's 138 and the I-15, and there are no cars. That's a weird feeling to get to, but this became my camera. I met this person, this family, I can't remember their last names, but they lost everything. Actually, no, I take that back. They saved their home, but they lost their entire farm and their nursery. And they lost all of their income on that one day. And while we were doing a story about the recovery after the blue cut fire, I found this teapot on their property. And I've always been interested, again, in the analog and the historical stuff. And I took that teapot and I turned it into a camera and I started making images with the teapot as a camera of all the locations that I went at the blue cut fire. So these are all the things that burnt down or got destroyed in the blue cut fire. Photographed by one of the objects that was actually burned in the fire. Those were all with a teapot. And then as I'm getting my master's, my car gets broken into, and of all the things they stole the box that had the teapot in it and all of my camera or all of my pinhole photography stuff in it. And so I had to get myself a new, and you guys can see this online. I know we only got 5 minutes left, but I wound up going back out and I found 4 or 5 other objects that were all damaged or destroyed in the teapot fire. Actually, let me stop share and I'll show you. This is my actual toolbox. Oh, while we're talking about portfolio, this was my toolbox that I used as a camera. And then after I was done using as a camera, it became my portfolio box that I could put all my photos in. Does that make sense?
That's cool. That's cool.
So all of my photos that I took inside the toolbox are now housed inside the toolbox that I actually used to make the camera. Does that make sense?
Okay, we're down to the last couple minutes. Any questions or comments or anything you want to ask as a last question? Damien,
Are photos behind him, are those his photos?
are those your photos? on
Yes.
the
Oh,
wall
let me
behind
do the, I just switched over to share screen and now I'm going to cancel.
you? Ken, question?
Can we go to events with you?
Can they, oh, so you get access with him?
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to contact him and find out. I'm guessing it probably not.
Well, he's right here.
So what do you mean with me?
Yeah,
Yeah, just search me out on Instagram. Best way right now is Instagram.
no, they want to tag along with you when you get
Oh.
access to places.
It's not out of the question, but it would be really slim. Yeah, there's I tell you, if the hold on. Are you guys seeing my screen or are you guys seeing me?
First, they're seeing you.
Okay, very good. Yeah, I would not be opposed to people coming along on photo sessions with me. It's a video job. I'm negotiating a video project right now that I might require a second videographer.
Okay, that's Ken.
So yeah,
Come on.
what's that?
Gianni asked, who is your favorite student?
Maybe that's your answer.
Yeah. No, everybody understand. Gianni is an Encore graduate. Gianni is one of the students that I had all the way through, beginning to end, intro, intermediate, advanced, and yearbook. And we built a yearbook through COVID. Yeah, sitting at home on our own home computers. Gianni was really instrumental in the COVID year. He was on it, man. Saved our butts.
Any final questions, comments? Okay, can you give him a big round of applause? Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, guys. Yep.
Okay. So the opening slide, you can guys look at the Zoom when I post it, had his contact information. So Ken, it's on the Zoom. If you didn't write it down before, I also have it if you need me to share it with you. Okay. Have a great weekend, class, and get your work done. Portfolio topic due Thursday. If you want to ask him a question, he's still on.
Because I want to talk to you. I want to talk to him about this.
He's right here. Talk to him right there.
Yeah, come on in.
I'm doing a homeless project, so I would
Okay.
like to contact you to maybe get some.
Yeah. Start off. Get a hold of me through Instagram. Send me a message,
Okay.
and I'll get you our. Then I'll get you our my actual cell phone and all that more personal contact info,
Perfect.
and can go from there.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
You're welcome.
Have a great weekend.
All right. Take
I'll
care.
be in
You
touch.
too.
I'll be in touch.
All right. See you later.
Bye.
Michelle, can you see if you could